Joining me now, history professor and author of Obama's America, a transformative vision of our national identity, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, hi, how are you?
Good to see you again, Liz.
I apologize for my raspy voice, fighting a little laryngitis here, but I promise that I have not been smoking 10 packs a day for the last 80 years. But Ian, let's start with this question of the day today, and this is President Trump reversed the directive from the Obama administration that forced schools across the nation to allow transgender kids to use the bathroom of their gender identity instead of their birth gender. Ian, what's the big deal about this reversal? It's not condoning bullying or discrimination. It's nothing against the LGBT community. It just sends the issues back to the state. So what's the big deal?
Well, I think it's a matter of understanding where states' rights fits into this. To me, it's a punt. If a right is guaranteed by the federal government, by federal law, if it's a civil right, then that trumps, no pun intended, states' rights. Right? I mean, we're going to be doing that a lot the next 8 years. It's still a real word. But I think, yeah, civil rights always trump states' rights, to me. And we're talking about a federal sex discrimination law. So if it's a federal law, then it should apply the same way in each state. I'm really not too concerned about federal government overreach over states. I'm more concerned about individual states being able to deny the rights of these individual states being able to deny the rights to individual human beings, right? Somewhere government is overreaching, whether it's the federal government over the states or it's the states over the human beings. I'm more concerned about the latter.
Right. And I don't think Republicans and Democrats actually disagree on that point. The disagreement, I think, stems from when you talk about this civil right, it's Title IX provisions here that ban sex discrimination in schools, and there's no precedent here. It hasn't been ruled on yet by the judiciary whether or not gender identity falls under that category of sex discrimination. We're actually probably going to hear a ruling from the Supreme Court by the end of March on that. But that's really the crux of the matter here, and that's why I'm not sure that it's been defined as a civil right. That's why I think it probably is best for the states to do that, because it seems to me this issue is politicized so often that there's a solution that would satisfy both arguments here. And that, I mean, some of these protests, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I don't think anyone, agree with him or not on many policies, would argue that Donald Trump is anti-gay.
I think I'm not going to get into Mr. Trump's personal position. It does seem that he's friendlier to LGBT rights, certainly than other conservative Republicans have been. And I think you made a good point about his position on gay marriage. What I would say is that, yes, we'll find out what the Supreme Court is going to say. They're going to be ruling on this young man's case. Gavin Grimm is his name, from Virginia. And I guess what we could talk about the merits of that is I guess I just try to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's born with certain parts, but somehow knows that those parts don't fit who they are. I mean, that's got to be an awful position to be in. Nobody would choose that. It's not fun. You're talking about a population that is 10 times more likely than the average to attempt suicide. Nobody's doing this for kicks. If they feel like being able to choose a bathroom of their choosing that fits with them and how they identify themselves is something that's going to make them feel more accepted, then I'm willing to go along with that. I just think of for example, just a specific example, somebody who is born with male parts, but by the age of 16 is dressing as a girl every day, going to school, wearing makeup, wearing a dress, having long hair. Is a school really going to force that person who looks like a girl to use the boys' bathroom? It doesn't make sense.
No, it's a very difficult position, and I think we all should, regardless of which side of the aisle. I mean, this isn't political per se. We should all feel compassion. You're exactly right. That's a very difficult position to be in. I think anyone who is transgendered would tell you that very bluntly. It's a very difficult situation. I think transgender people in our nation are very lucky to be born in this time and not 100 or 200 years ago, because our society in general is so accepting of people that have different gender identities, different sexual orientations, what have you. But putting yourself in those shoes, I mean, I have to play the devil's advocate just a little bit too, because when you talk about that, I don't think very many people would disagree that the specific situation that you said, a high schooler or a 16-year-old who is dressing and acting and living as a different gender, perhaps no, that wouldn't be an issue, but that's such a very small part of the population that situation applies to. When you look at the larger part of the population, this law, if gender identity were allowed to be the determining factor in which bathroom that you went into, that also opens the door to a lot of sexual predators taking advantage of that. And we've seen that even in the private sector, in Target, for example, since they allowed gender identity to be the determining factor in their bathrooms. We've seen a lot of voyeurs, we've seen a lot of sexual harassment, a lot of sexual predators in their bathrooms. That arguably impacts more people than transgender people.
I think that's an important point, and I'm glad you brought it up because I did look into this as well. And according to the advocates on the issue, there are 18 states and 200 municipalities that have instituted this kind of law protecting gender identity in bathrooms, and not one of those states or municipalities has seen any kind of uptick in sexual assault or sexual violence. Have there been incidents at Target? Perhaps, but there have been incidents that, there are always incidents. It's a matter of, is this law making things worse? Is this law putting people at risk? And there's no evidence to suggest that the law is putting anybody at risk.
Well, this particular directive from President Obama, we can't actually say whether or not. I mean, it's a judge put a stay on it. It's on hold. It hasn't been implemented in any way. We don't have any empirical data to see whether that particular law made a difference. I mean, we do have anecdotal evidence from Target since last May, particularly in the fall. Once it was implemented, they did have an uptick in the number of voyeurs, the number of sexual predators, the number of people that were not truly transgender. They were just predators disguising themselves as transgenders, which is an awful thing to do. It gives a bad name to non-predatory transgender people. They had a large uptick in the number of incidents of that nature, and I think it is a valid concern. That was my other question for you, and that is, even if it's not a case of sexual predators, there are people in our nation, and I would even count myself as one of these people, who wouldn't want my young daughter, if I had a daughter, to go into a public bathroom knowing that a grown man, no matter how he identified, if he had man parts, was able to be in there too. And my question is, that number of people is a lot larger than the number of transgender people, a lot larger than the number of sexual predators. How much value, do we take those opinions into consideration, or do they mean nothing?
I think it's an interesting question, and it's an important question. The rights of the many are important. I think it is important to you're talking about Target, you're talking about an uptick there, but it is important to say that if there are 18 states and 200 municipalities and they haven't seen an uptick across those jurisdictions, that should outweigh some anecdotes from Target. But I think you raise an important question. The public bathrooms are separate from schools. I think the school issue, you've got minors. You've got to treat them a bit differently, and I think there you've certainly got to err on the side of protecting their rights. School bathrooms are not public bathrooms where people can just walk in from the outside. And you also have to remember that sexual assault obviously is already a crime. So we've got to see if there's any evidence that people are actually in more danger. I'm not discounting the fact that people might be made uncomfortable by being put in certain situations. Nobody should go into a bathroom and have to see somebody else's private parts. So we've all got to be reasonable at how we deal with one another.
Right.
I think it's an important question, but transgender people need to be able to feel like they are respected. Then also, obviously, everybody has to respect everybody else, especially when you're talking about.
No, I know, and that's what happens in an ideal world. But we can look even on college campuses. There have been campuses. I think there was one actually in Canada that did the gender neutral locker rooms. They allowed the showers and the sinks and everything to be gender neutral. You didn't have to go in girls and boys, and they saw an immediate uptick in voyeurism. They saw immediate uptick in boys, bringing their cell phones in and trying to record the girls, reaching under the stalls to try to get pictures. That is human nature, like it or not. Our human nature is not perfect. That does exist, and I think that does need to be taken into consideration. I'm hesitant, in a sense, to let it go to empirical evidence, because if you wait for it to happen, if we wait to see if sexual assault, if predatory behavior is going to happen under that, that's using these victims as guinea pigs, and I'm not really willing to do that. Ian, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about it. It was great to talk to you. All right, guys, we'd like to know your thoughts on the matter, too. Tweet me, Liz_Wheeler. We'll be back in a minute.